And we are live.
Yay.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, we are live now. Okay, perfect. So, ladies, thank you very much for being here, and thank you, Karen, and all the organizing committee for organizing this chat today and next Saturday as well. This is very exciting for us to learn about what is happening on your continent, especially with Lady Mimes, which I guess it was quite unusual some 20, 30 years ago, but not anymore. There are more and more mimes, female mimes all around the world. And I've been teaching at the university for some years. And I had, at some point, I had more female students than male students. So I think that's a great step for the art of mime on our planet. And I'm sure that will bring a completely new, not only new sentiment, but new way of doing things, which is perfect. So again, greetings from the World Mime Organization. And I'll leave you now to Karen Hoyer, who organized this chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marco.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marco. This is not a political discussion, but I did want to open with a few words about the extraordinary and very stressful week that we've had here in our country.
Yeah.
We see very clearly that our country is deeply divided racially, economically, and politically. And like every other country in the world, the coronavirus has really affected everything that we do in our work and in our lives. But all of us here have gathered to talk about this art form that we really love. And in thinking about this art form of mime that transcends words, I think about the history of the art form, which has a tradition of exploring difficult topics and challenging the status quo and creating wordless protests against repression and injustice, as well as creating really delightful entertainment and showing people how to laugh at the folly of humans and the ridiculousness of our life. And so I think that this is an extraordinary time that we're living in, but I think this art form is ideal for discussing and exploring some of the issues we all face. And all of these women here today have persevered in a country that is not famous for supporting the arts, at least in terms of government subsidy. I think it's really hard to make a living as an artist and to persevere and continue. And I am just extraordinarily honored to be with these women who have contributed so much to the arts and to education and bringing up young people in the art form and opening their eyes to the possibilities of movement theater. So I'm going to just name each person, and then we're going to have a little chance for each of us to do a little biography, a little arc. This was the arc of my career. So my name is Karen Hoyer, and today we have with us Marguerite Mathews.
Hello.
Wave your hand so we know who's who. Karen Montanaro, Catherine Gasta, and Joan Merwyn. And so we can take turns. Maybe I will start with talking about a little bit of where I come from. And I know that this is really difficult, but the idea was just to do like a short burst of like, this is what happened to me and this is how I became a mime. And the only way that I could figure out how to do it in a brief way that wasn't just, then I went here and then I did this. I was thinking about the different themes in my life as an artist. And I was very lucky to start out with parents who supported the arts, who were involved in the arts. My father was a drama teacher. My mother was a piano teacher and an extraordinary singer. And they didn't blink when I wanted to go and study theater at North Carolina School of the Arts. I had a wonderful teacher there, James Donlan, who really influenced a lot of students to pursue mime and mask and clown. But also there, we had teachers who encouraged us to write our own material. We had a period in style class where we had to research historical characters and create a one-woman show. And I also, for the first time, was studying with Bob Francisconi, discovered improv. So there was this sort of beginning where I was introduced to mime, but I was also introduced to the idea of creating your own work. And I think that's a big theme in my career, is that I'm not just an interpreter, I'm a creator of work. So that's one thing about the art form that I really love. When I launched my career, I started a company called Partners in Mime with Carol DeLong and Elizabeth Tabler, and we toured in the schools. So there's like two more themes that I really love working with children, and that partnership is really important to me. So almost all of the things that I've done have been about working with other people and collaborating. And our company, Partners in Mime, toured in the schools, mostly in the Midwest. And that was a really wonderful thing to do. It was also a hard thing to do because we were our own producers, and we managed everything in terms of being a not-for-profit. It's exhausting. But in terms of partnership, that's still something that I do. I'm really involved in healthcare clowning with Healthy Humor, where we always go in with a partner. We're always working as two clown doctors. And that partnership is so much fun and so valuable. And when I was interested in puppetry, and I started a new company called KFC Puppet Partners, it's always about partnership. So, and I think also I want to say here in terms of partnership that I couldn't have done anything that I did without my extraordinary partner, who is my husband, Richard, who has been the person that encouraged me and supported me through this long career that I've had. So I think that another aspect is the idea of being a lifetime learner, studying. And whenever I got stuck, I would go and study. I went to San Francisco and studied with Bert Houle and Sophie Libaud, who were teaching Decru technique, and they were wonderful. And I had a chance to perform while I was in San Francisco. And then when I get stuck again, I went to these festivals that were happening as I was coming up at the Movement Theater International in Elkins, West Virginia. And there I met Sigfrido Aguilar, who I think is like my most simpatico teacher, that his method of teaching clicked with me so much more than the Decru technique and the other types of mime that I had studied. And I continued to work with him, and he fostered my tour in Mexico as a part of a big festival he put on. We went down there and created a show together, and he came up and worked with my company, Partners in Mime. So that ongoing learning was a really important part of my life too. And then finally, I think the thing that I wanted to talk about was the fact that I see mime as a root to all the things that I do. So everything grows out of that sort of base. So as a clown, as a mask performer, as a puppeteer, as a creator of eccentric characters, they all come from this base of mime. and the connections that I've made through the mime world. Like, for instance, my friend Karen Sheridan pulled me into, she recommended me to teach at Clown College, Ringling Brothers Clown College. And I was opened up this incredible community of clowns that have really fed my knowledge of the circus and of clowns, and really opened me up as a performer. The idea of puppetry became really strong to me when I discovered, working with Michael Montenegro, who's this incredible puppeteer, that puppets are, the way they move is mime technique. When they walk across the stage, they're doing the mime walk. And then the other part about partnership that this is the last little bit, then I'll get somebody else to talk. I have a twin sister whose name is Kathy, and at one point she became a part of Partners in Mime, and I just realized, oh, that's why I'm always doing partnership, because from birth I had this partner, and the two of us were doing mime together, and you know, you can imagine that any kind of mirror mime would work really well with twins. But she and I also, she's an extraordinary background as a trapeze artist, and she taught me trapeze and I taught her mime, and we created a project called the Angel Project. And we also were hired by the Lyric Opera to become bungee flying Rhine maidens for this huge production of the Ring cycle, and that combined our two art forms of acrobatics and mime, because we were lip syncing to these extraordinary music. So there you have it in a nutshell, all of my extraordinary, wonderful things that I've gotten to do in my life. I feel so fortunate. And it's kind of fun to like do a little retrospective of what happened to me. So I would like to say now it's somebody else's turn to do their little arc of their career. Does somebody feel ready to do that? You know, raise your hand, or should I pick somebody? Joan, that would be wonderful. Joan, tell us.
I'll go. Hi, everybody. Thank you. That was wonderful. And I identify so much, Karen, with a lot of the things that you said in terms of ongoing training throughout my whole life. I'm still training. I feel like I'm always going to be training. The diversity of aspects of physical theater, new vaudeville, mask work, clown work, puppet work, and pure mime work, all coming from a base of pure mime for me as well. So I identify with a lot of that. Also, you know, the pleasure and the richness of collaboration and ensemble work and partnering work, as well as I've done quite a bit of solo work as well. So all of these things have woven together. I'll just take a quick little backtrack to, I mean, you can see all the details on our resume. We're posting our resumes and our websites and everything for everybody to see. So we're not going to get into all the details of all that right now. But just to tell you how I got into it, back in the early 70s, 1971 to be exact, I had just come back from India where I had been studying Indian dance. And I grew up, I wasn't really an athletic person, or I wasn't particularly strong or coordinated, or I wasn't studying dance as I was growing up. But I started to study Indian dance when I was about 19 years old. And when I was a child, I saw Marcel Marceau on TV a lot. It was a black and white TV, and everybody would sit around the TV like people in the old ages sitting around a fire. And Marcel Marceau came on, and of course, I was totally mesmerized. I did not become a white-face pantomime artist, although I do practice some pantomime. I've never really gotten into the whiteface thing, but he, I think, was definitely in the back of my mind, his work as an influence. And then one day I was in San Francisco and I was 21 years old, just turned 21. I was walking down the street and I saw a poster with a circle with lines going through it and geometric lines going through it. It looked like a Japanese, it was like Japanese brush painting. And it said 10-week intensive mime course with Leonard Pitt. And Leonard had just come back from DeCreux and was one of DeCreux's proteges. And he was offering a 10-week, 5 hours a day, 5 days a week workshop. And I just landed on the West Coast. I'm originally from the East Coast. I had just come back from India before that. I had been there for a year. So I jumped into that. And that first workshop kind of cracked me open physically, emotionally, as a physical actor. And then I continued working with Leonard for a couple of years. While I was also very soon after that, maybe a year or two, I started working with James Donlan, who had a studio out there. So I was getting more of the other kind of mime from James, and a lot of creativity. And of course, always in every mime, it's class, it's improvisation. So learning the technique, which is very specific, and then finding ways to express ourselves with the technique. So this is the struggle. This is the, not being afraid to make myself look like a fool. I eventually kept studying, and I started studying political theater because I was living in Berkeley, and that's what was going on there. And I was very influenced by Bertolt Brecht, and people who were practicing, Ronnie Davis was teaching epic theater techniques. He was one of the founders of the San Francisco Mime Troupe. So I was doing a lot of things. And then this clown woman showed up who had just gotten back from training in Italy. And her name was Celia McCarthy. And we started a mime clown theater duo called Fools Unlimited. And we performed all over the West Coast. And the reason I bring up this in particular is that the women's movement at the time was very, very strong in the 70s. And they supported us. They were flying us up and down the West Coast. We were opening for people like Chris Williamson and Lily Tomlin. Oh. And the audiences were largely often women, not only, but often. So we did receive a lot of support at the time. Now I went on from there to what I basically did with my life was I would find the teachers that I wanted to learn from, and I would move to that location, and I would get a job or whatever, and then I would study intensively with these people. So I spent 2 years in Europe, and I was working with a theater company there and partnering up with another DeCreux mime who was also doing clown work and other kinds of work. Sally Gores, who's still active and an artist. She's from Australia. And we work with the Builder Theater in Bremen, and as well as with, we did a lot of street theater all over Europe with two musicians called the Too Much Brothers. And we did a lot of work. So both staged work and street theater, which I have to say the United States does not support street theater. Like Europe, European audiences understand that street theater is, or street mime or whatever you're doing, is an art form, and it's something that is a type of work and the working people contribute, and it's easy to make a living doing it. It was at the time. Here, the consciousness just isn't there in the United States. They don't know what you're doing, and they don't tend to give much money. And the people who gave the most money were the working people in Europe. So that was interesting. But I was also doing a lot of theater work there and large scale giant puppets because somebody from Bread and Puppet was there. So there was just a whole lot of combination of dance and theater, acting, excuse me, experimental theater. I went to Poland 3 times. I performed at that Mime Festival, one of the Mime international festivals there twice, but I wasn't very good, I don't think, compared to a few years later, but I did it. You have to be not afraid to not be that good. How else are we gonna get better, right? So, but then I started studying pretty intensely with, I took some intensive trainings with Jerzy Grotowski's company in Poland and studied Grotowski from the laboratory there. And I also, much later in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s, I was the 90s, studied with Richard Czeslak from Grotowski. So anyway, I spent a couple of years there. So I'm not going to go through everything, but I spent a couple of years in Europe. Then I spent a couple of years in Michigan with Tom Lebhart's company, which is very pure corporeal mime. And I kept honing it and honing it. From there, I went to a couple of years in Montreal to work with Jean Asselin and Denise Boulanger, who were teaching corporeal mime. These were all proteges of de Cruz, but at the same time, I was teaching myself. And all along, I've always been teaching myself. That's how I've made a living, is teaching. So I've been very blessed. I haven't really had to have a straight job, like a regular job. I've always been able to teach. And I also identify with what Karen said, because I also work with children and adults. And I've also worked with special needs people, with the elderly, with people with mental illnesses, with homeless people. So I have a very broad range of people that I work with in mime and physical theater, as well as other art forms as well. So anyway, I've sort of been, in 1983, I went to New York, and for 10 years, I was in Margolis Brown Adapters Company. And Carrie Margolis was a huge influence on me. She's going to be on one of these panels in the future, I hope. She's an amazing director, physical theater actor who's come up with her own methodology, but she started with de Cruz too. So I was in that company, which mixed a lot of movement theater with also video projections, and was starting to get into the tech world, the high tech worlds. So I was like from 85 to 95, around that time, I was working intensely with them. And then I started my own company in New York, and been doing solo shows off and on throughout my whole career. So that kind of brings it all down to what I'm doing now. I have 2 solo shows. One is for families, audiences, and one is for adults. It's a little more adulty. And I'm working on a new piece that I think I might try to work on it originally purely because of the times we're in, purely for online viewing or internet, finding a way to do that. So I'm working on that. That's about war and the effects of war on innocent civilians. So that's a long-term project that I've been working on, and I'm doing it in individual chunks, pieces, which some have been performed as works in progress. So, and for the time being now, I'm working with children a lot, and children with New York City underprivileged youth. And it's just an honor to work with these kids. They're so brilliant, and they're so creative, and there's a strong need. So trying to bring all this to the current COVID reality, where we have to do it all online, has been very challenging. So I'm grappling with all that right now. But there's lots more, but I have to say, just to answer one thing about Marco, what he said, there's always been women mimes, always. In fact, every class I took, in every situation I've been in, has always had the majority of women in the class. So those women who pursue it and end up doing their own performance work or becoming directors and choreographers are out there. I don't know if they're getting as much commercial recognition. I think Catherine has some things to say about that, but because she's more aware of what's going on right now with that. But I have to say, throughout my career, I've been incredibly inspired by both men and women, and practicing and training with my colleagues and fellow students and sisters who are trying to develop work, and giving each other feedback and all that. That's the richness of it. So so that's pretty much it. I do think women have always been in the field. I don't think they've always been recognized as much. But I think that's changing. I don't feel like I've had any personal obstacles because I'm a woman in terms of pursuing what I do, because what I do is pretty much original work, as Karen also said. I create my own work. I'm not trying to fit into somebody else's scenario unless I'm in a company. And in the companies that I have been in several companies, and the companies I was in was all based on work that we created together through improvisation. And the director would take that material and mold it into something. So,
well, that's really wonderful, Joan. Thank you for that. That was like a huge. I just love hearing the whole story of people. Is somebody else would like to volunteer? Karen, would you like to go next?
Sure.
Great.
Yeah, I think I should have known that I'd be very attracted to mime when my favorite thing in the world as a child was watching Red Skelton on TV. And I just loved him. I'd be the only one in my family sitting in front of that TV. And I loved his character. I loved his sketches. And I particularly loved how he did the cowbell thing. He'd just be walking around along and then do a little flippity do. And I thought that was the funniest thing. And then I was a very, very shy child out in the world. And I would get sick in school just because I was stressed out. And I was afraid that my mother was going to die if I wasn't with her. I mean, I had a lot of, angst. And I went dutifully to my ballet classes. I think my parents were trying to get me out of this shell. And for 4 years, I was studying ballet and still, shoulders up to here, as stiff as you could imagine. And one day in the 4th year of ballet, I had what I call a religious experience, doing a simple waltz across the floor. And it was like I felt my body moving in space with the music. And when you're 12, you're not really that self-aware. So this memory of this experience that I had when I was 12 has recurred to me, came back to me when I was like 50 years old, like a burst, like now you're ready to understand this moment that happened when you were 12. And I stood there after this waltz turn. I had goosebumps all over my body. And I thought, I'm going to dance forever. And after that, I really came out of this huge shell that I didn't even know I was in. And I danced like my life depended on it. And I stopped needing to make friends at school. I stopped groveling to be popular. I was bullied. But now I had ballet. And so right out of high school, a year out of high school, I went into the professional ballet world. And gradually, I would say that world as a professional ballet dancer is both incredible, but also very, very dangerous. And it was for me. And I didn't realize that I had learned through this ballet technique to identify with technique, that my self-worth depended on how I compared with other dancers. And without realizing it, all my spontaneity was leaving my life. I was replacing spontaneity with discipline. I didn't even answer my phones. This was the day before even phone machines and cell phones, certainly. I stopped answering my phones. I only dealt with a very small, narrow spectrum of friends. And I got to a place where I wanted to, leave the dance world and go into the medical profession because my friends were dying of AIDS. And meanwhile, I was dealing with anorexia, I would say, anxiety, depression, and even suicidal thoughts. But I thought this was kind of normal. I mean, everybody told me that they had these same kind of experiences, but I was really in a very difficult place, but I was a performer. So I was able to go out into life. I was able to perform. I was able to pretend that I was normal. And then I would go into my own little apartment and realize I don't want to wake up tomorrow. Fortunately, right around that time, I met this guy named Tony Montanaro, and you could see my last name is Montanaro's. But I was hired to dance in the Nutcracker, local Nutcracker. I was hired to do the lead ballet role because I was a professional dancer, and here I am working in a regional ballet company. So I did the Sugar Plum Fairy, and they hired Tony to do the character part of Drosselmeyer. I don't know if you know. Well, anyway, it's a classic Christmas ballet. And out of a sense of obligation, I went to see Tony's show because he was in the cast. So I better go see his show. He was 60 years old. He was going through a divorce. He was not happy in his life. So he was overweight and he was wearing spandex. He's a mime. And spandex is not good for an overweight mime, and I could see his jock strap through his pants and his belly's sticking out and he's growing his hair long. And I'm a 27-year-old ballet dancer and I'm, in really great shape and I'm dressed, and I'm sitting there in this tiny little theater. There are only 80 seats. And Tony comes out and he starts moving, he comes out and first I have all this judgment about his appearance. And then he starts moving. And I could not believe what this was doing to me. I felt a giggle was rising up out of the center of my bones. That was all the best that I could describe his effect on me was this little giggle. It was like pink champagne bubbles coming up out of the core. And I mean, he was doing nothing. This was like, all he's doing is characters. He's playing cowboys and he's, getting his guns like this. I thought, this is the best I've ever seen. I've never felt this happy in my life. And I went up to him after the show and I said, Tony, I have to know what you're doing. And a week later, we're in the same cast. So I had a chance to follow up on that. We were in his living room and I said, Tony, teach me something. He said, okay, get up. So here I am. I get up off the couch. I'm ready to do anything because here I am, a dutiful ballet dancer. I can follow directions like nobody's business. And he said, do a move. Do a move. Now, here I am. I'm a professional ballet dancer. I have a daunting movement vocabulary. And I could, in those days, I could do anything. And somehow I knew that none of those moves that I had trained and perfected and copied was going to help me. And I knew that I had to let a move rise up out of the unexplored, unpredictable, unfamiliar parts of myself. And I panicked. I was afraid of looking stupid. And I realize now, again, here's an old memory, over 20 years old. Now it's coming back to me that I was afraid of my own originality. And that's what this incessant training on my technique had gotten me into this fear of being original. And in this moment, I literally, in the same way those pink bubble things came out of my bones, I could see all the no voices from the culture pressing down on me saying, no, Karen, don't move. You're going to look stupid. You're going to regret it. Just do one of your pirouettes and get this over with, and the yes voice inside of myself was saying, come on, Karen, you can do this. And I let the yes voice come up because I knew somehow that my life depended on it. It's that simple and it's that complex, but my life depended on this moment. And I let that yes voice rise and gather momentum and energy. And I just did the stupidest move you can imagine. I just went, and went down to the floor and I came back up. My face was as red as a ripe Macintosh apple. I felt burn, burn, burn. I was so embarrassed. I hugged Tony so he wouldn't look at my face. And all I said was, Tony, I've forgotten how to play. That's all I knew at the moment, was I had forgotten how to play. Now, when you talk about creativity and how being a mime, you have to create your own material, I realized that that whole organic, childlike creativity, we are the creative process. I had completely severed myself from my lifeblood, the creative life flow. And so, for the next 15 years, I studied with Tony. Eventually, we did get married because I realized, I was in love with him. But those 15 years, and he died in 2002. Those whole 15 years I was in incubation. I was in the arms of love, as all the tendrils holding my creativity, my spontaneity, my organic stuff was just unwound. So now I feel, for me, mime is much more than an art form. For me, mime was a way back to life. It was a way back to empathizing with my audience, with my subject matter, with doors. You can empathize with a door, because you have to show all these things. You have to capture not what they are, but what makes them look real. And why are you opening a door? Don't just open a door to show off your technique. It's got to somehow reveal something about your character. So this art form is really in total service to humanity and what makes us empathic life forces that are connected. And this is where I think it's so important now in this day, Karen, when you were talking about how much stress we're under in this divisive, these divisions are coming up. They've been there all along, but they're coming up now in steroids. And I do think mime is a way to really, prove that we're not divided. Yeah. At the visceral level, we are not divided. We are emotionally and socially and empathically, viscerally connected. Thank you.
Karen, thank you. That's extraordinary sharing and a very vulnerable way to let us in on that story. It's really amazing. This is what I remember. I've only had the one little chance to take a workshop when you and Tony came to the Big Apple Circus Clown Care retreat. And the little nugget that I remember him as is a very supportive teacher, because he said, okay, we're going to try these ideas out. And they're not even half-baked ideas. They're just quarter-baked. So you had the permission to just do a little, and it would be enough because you could go further, which I thought.
Pretty soon he had to say 16th baked, 1/32th baked, because people were so trying to do something, that they knew would work.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Marguerite, Catherine, who would like to go next? Marguerite.
Wonderful. I started in just a regular theater program at a university, Michigan State University, and there happened to be at that school many international students who were there to study agriculture, but they brought their own culture with them. And so I was exposed to a different international, mostly Asian forms of theater while I was there, just on people who were not doing it professionally, but who were sharing their culture. And I was able to study a little bit of Sanskrit drama with an Indian teacher while I was there. And I also was exposed to films of Etienne Decroux. It looked very mysterious to me. I didn't understand what he was doing. It was so abstract. But at any rate, I eventually was able to travel to France, and I studied with Decroux for 2 winters. I was there at the same time that Daniel Stein was there, Jean Asselin, Denise Boulanger, and Tom Lebhart had just left. And when I got tired of starving in Paris, I asked Tom, could I come and study with him where I could get a part-time job while I was studying? So I ended up in Arkansas, University of Arkansas, where I studied with him there. And then I also followed him to the Valley Studio in Spring Green, Wisconsin, and studied with him there. Also, I then became kind of the organizer. Tom thought that I could organize things well, so that's what he put me into. So I was organizing the new directory for the International Mimes and Pantomimists with Reed Gilbert, who was the director of Valley Studio, and also organizing Tom's career and Tom's company work in terms of their touring work. That was so valuable to me because it taught me how to write grants. It taught me how to set up tours. It taught me how to run a company. It taught me how to do fundraising. It taught me how to set up a 501c3 organization. And I think that there are so many people who were much more talented than myself, but they didn't pick up those skills, and it made it impossible to have a long career in the art that they were pursuing. So I'm now in my 43rd season with a very small company that I created, Pontine Theater in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, a little seaside community, about an hour north of Boston, an hour south of Portland. And I had been, well, my company has been as large as 5 people. And then for the last several decades has been just myself and a partner, Greg Gathers, whose background is in the visual arts. So I have all of the directing responsibility and dramaturgy, and he creates all of the sets and props and puppetry and toy theater figures and everything that we use. We have had 4 different spaces now. Presently, we're in a city-owned space. It's a 1845 brick schoolhouse, 1 room with accommodates an audience of about 40 people. It's very intimate, very small, which is what we prefer. That makes us scale all our work in such a way that we are successful touring to the tiny little rural communities all over, mostly in northern New Hampshire, which is our touring base. So every year we do a Christmas tour. Every year we do a history-based spring tour where we visit probably 25 communities for each of the tours, so 50 altogether. We have a subscription audience at our little base in Portsmouth, which we've been successful in keeping our audience together for the kind of work we do. We present guest artists as well as our own work. So we used to present all mime, but that got harder and harder to fill a schedule with. And we, over the years, have become colleagues with other organizations that have certainly a strong movement element to their work. Great Small Works out of New York City, Concrete Temple Theater. We have been influenced by their work. We not really collaborate with them, but they see our work, we see their work. We converse about the work. Another strong influence for us has been Independent Eye out of Sebastopol, California. We've also been influenced a lot by other puppet companies, which I know that Joan was talking about how the puppet moves as a trained mime moves. And so moving into puppetry was very natural for us to do. I think the big motor behind everything that I've been trying to do is to pursue Decroux's meta idea, which was we are declaring a 100-year war on theater. We're throwing everyone else out. We're throwing directors out. We're throwing playwrights out. We're throwing costumers out who give you costumes you can't move in. We're throwing set designers out that give you impossible sets to move on and to take power back ourselves. So having that as my main idea, meant that I take responsibility. We do all our own grant writing, the artists, just Greg and myself at this point. We do all of our own grant writing. We do all of our cleaning of our little space. We do everything ourselves. The hands-on of the whole thing is so important to me. DeCrew's idea that it's the actor who is the unique artist of the theater, and everything that exudes out of that actor's work creates the environment that the audience comes to connect with. So from the time of welcoming people at the door to intermixing with them before the show begins, all of that sense that people have already addressed about creating community through the work that you do has really been the great inspiration for us. We live in a historic town. They really are. Everybody in Portsmouth is, well, actually in New England is really into history. And that's led us to look for what's familiar in terms of subject matter that we can then explore in perhaps unfamiliar ways, unfamiliar conventions on stage. So we do mostly work that is created in New England, historic works, cultural works. Sarah Orne Jewett, a 19th century writer from South Berwick, Maine. We've done Nathaniel Hawthorne, Celia Thaxter, many 19th century writers, because DeCrew always told us that you can use other people's words as long as they've been dead for 100 years and will get what you're doing. And so we've been following that prescript and then trying to bring these stories that have a familiarity to our audiences to life on stage. So that's pretty much my story.
That's so wonderful, Marguerite. I need us all to sort of take a little breath because of what Joan just posted. I don't know if you saw this, but Joan just posted. They have officially called Joe Biden as the next president of the United States.
Hooray.
So everybody just take a nice deep breath. That also say a little prayer to the universe that we can bring our very divided country together, and that we'll all work together. And maybe our mission as mimes is to figure out how, without using words, we can bring people together. So just deep breath, everyone. Marguerite, I also wanted to connect with you because I know you were really, really involved with Movement Theater International and producing Movement Theater Quarterly, which I wrote articles for purely for selfish reasons, because there was a lot of really good movement theater coming to Chicago at that time period. And my way of getting to see it all was to become a part of the press.
Right.
But I also found that having that place to publish my work made me really have a better eye. When you're writing about something, you really start to observe it. Yes. And I think that whole library of Movement Theater Quarterly has got some fabulous history in it.
I have the whole archive, and I need to find a place to put it. So Thomas Lebhart and Reed Gilbert, it all started there. Well, actually, no, it started with American Mime Theater with Paul Curtis. And then it was the newsletter of international mimes and pantomimists. And then over the years, when it got handed in to Reed Gilbert at Valley Studio and Tom Lebhart took over as editor, then it became, because of the problem we were having with the word mime, of saying, no, not that, no, not that, not that. That when became movement theater became the way that people tried to not have to explain what they were doing. It changed its focus and became much more in line with what Tom was doing with Mime Journal. I was also working with him on Mime Journal at the same time. And at some point, Tom turned it over to Pontine, to my organization, to shepherd. And I kept it for 5 years, and I turned it over to Carrie Margolis when we ended ours. And at some point, it just was hard to keep the whole thing moving forward, so it got dropped. But from the time, I think I have every issue from when Tom started it at Valley Studio all the way through the end of my tenure. So a good chunk of time. I have every single issue. I have pictures that were submitted to the magazine. So anyone, if you find out someone who has a place to shepherd that archive, I'd be glad to pass it on.
I think it's very interesting that it's frequently the women that are organizing and preserving and in the background. But that's another sort of subject, and I really want Catherine to have her.
Yes.
So thank you, Marguerite. And Catherine, why don't you have your turn?
Thank you, Karen, and everybody. I feel a little, so honored to be and hear firsthand all your histories and the variety, and it's fascinating how different and similar we all are. We could spend 3 more hours talking about those parallels. I'm going to go pretty quickly. Of course, I have, some experience, but not quite as extensive as these marvelous female mimes with me. So as a child outside of Philadelphia, the suburbs, I was often very bored. We played charades a lot at when we went to visit my family in Nashville. And so I started becoming an actor or performer, you could say, I think from doing that. I had my ballet teacher when I was very young, and then I had her again when I was in high school. And she said, no, you've always been a performer. I remember when you danced around with scarves to music, like nobody could touch you. And it was amazing to watch. And I was like, oh, I remember that, but I don't remember performing. And so I did take some dance, and I took theater. I was also athletic. I went to Point Park University. And at that school, I met someone that encouraged me throughout my whole 4 years, and even gave me what she had learned from the Eugene O'Neill's National Theater Institute program. And it's just a 13-week program. And I went to that immediately after graduating college instead of during. And by attending that, I got invited several years later to a Michael Chekhov conference where I met a Russian director that was working with 2 artists from Tbilisi, Georgia, in Washington, D.C. And I really, since I graduated college, didn't know, it was a college when I attended, it's now a university, where to go. And I also did have a very definite goal to apprentice something and learn something that was very, very unique. And I had no idea what it was, but after going to the O'Neill program, I felt that within me. But I didn't want to be a dancer, and I didn't want to be just an actor. So I then connected and worked with Pata and Irina Sekurishvili that now runs Sonetic Theater in Washington, D.C., an amazing, amazing company. They've done about 13 or 14 productions of Shakespeare without any words. Plenty of music and other arts and even parkour incorporated. They're one of the most exciting companies on the East Coast as far as physical theater, and actively working. And they teach, and I did a lot of outreach for children with them, and created outreach programs that were basically, 45-minute wordless pantomimes set to music. We pressed play, and there was no sound person. And having the audience response I had after doing children's theater at college and doing pantomime in front of children forever changed my opinion on a lot of theater. It was like I was literally a cartoon that these children were watching. There was laughs right on the beat. I mean, I couldn't have learned pantomime, I felt. And, as far as my experience with college and my exposures, a better base to learn pantomime from. When I first watched Patti and Irina explore and work in the rehearsal studio, I was the only American in the room, so it was all in Russian because they were working with a Russian director, and I didn't need it. I didn't need to hear what they were saying. I was like, actually, like, I'm kind of glad I don't have to work in this part, participate in this discussion. But just really clear, distinct communication of inner monologue, inner, character, whole scene, just mesmerizing. And there was no miming and there was no wall. It was just them, literally doing silent acting. And of course, I also loved being trained in the great art library that Pata has from doing mime in the state Tbilisi pantomime theater since he was 9 years old. So I got to learn a lot of vocabulary over the 8 years I was with them and a company member. And then I moved to New York. I created a piece or two here independently, but did also a lot of sketch theater and or sketch comedy and commercial work. So now I'm just, I've been teaching online during the pandemic, and I get most of my work as a mime through gigs. But those are all very rewarding on micro levels too, because I see someone that's, 6 years old seeing a mime for the first time, and to be able to give this technique and this art, to them is really great. It's part of like what I think of my outreach, because I'll do reduced rates and stuff. But I am looking to make larger works. And unlike, traditional mime, I'm starting to really like to layer on the different theatrical aspects of animation, projection, simultaneous with a performer. I've seen several things. I've seen James Terry several times here in Brooklyn. And if there's somebody I could go just jump and be in their company, it would be with James Terry I think he's in Switzerland now. I mean, just phenomenal. So great grandson of Charlie Chaplin. But that's my history. And my goal is to just do, I have a couple of pieces on the burners, of course, but my most, urgent is a refugee story about survival and making the distinction between the performer and imagery on the stage indistinguishable to the audience. And that's a very expensive, S. Devlin kind of, she's a designer, goal of mine, but I really see it in my mind, and I want impactful performance from pantomime. And for me, pantomime and mime is so universal. And during the pandemic, connected with a lot of different mime artists from across the world. So I really do feel that just watching silent acting is a universal thing that, every human can share. And when the performer is filled richly, it's like mesmerizing. And that's what I love about it. That's what keeps me returning to it. So thank you again for having me on this and being a part of this. I'm so excited to get started and get going. Yeah.
Catherine, thank you so much. One of the things that you said, I really, really resonated with me about the idea of working on solo work, which is difficult and intense, and it can be very satisfying, but it can also be very lonely. And the idea of being able to like join a company. And I remember this visiting company from Italy, I think called Ale, and I remember interviewing them, and it was for the Movement Theater Quarterly. They were here in Chicago, and they were just a wonderful company. And I said, well, how do you get to be a part of this company? And he said, well, you fall in love, because they were all couples that had come together and working together. And so obviously their work was very intimate and visceral because they knew each other so closely. So I was like, oh, well, I guess I can't join your company that way.
Yeah, it was interesting working with the Securishvilis, because I entered exactly a year after, like I just randomly came and worked for them. There wasn't really much of a company yet who they were working with before they became Synthetic Theater. And, you know, they had some students tell them outright, like, there's not really a way with it being Washington, D.C. and the Shakespeare Theater and the Forbes Theater, that you could do a King Lear without any words. Like, we don't think it's going to work. And the security feelings were like, well, yes, Europe. So, and they ended up doing one of the most phenomenal productions of King Lear I've ever seen in my life. I wasn't in it, but phenomenal. And like, it strikes you to the core, like cerebrally. I mean, when you see their productions. So I really think, you know, it's interesting how people's perspective changed. And like Marguerite, you were talking about avoiding using the word mime, and that's still going on. And we're still using physical theater and movement theater instead of pantomime theater. So the struggle is real. Yeah.
That's a great segue, Catherine. First of all, just to say that we're hoping that Irina will be one of the guests in a future Women in Mime forum. But I think the next sort of subject that I wanted to play around with was this whole idea of like, how do you define mime? And do you use the word mime? Do we need a different name for it? Is that an old argument that we just are just going to let it go? Or because it seems like all of us have done so many different types of things and have different ways of doing it. You know, anybody just jump in, like in terms of like, how do we define mime?
Yeah, I'll say something real quick. Oh, sorry. Is that okay? I'll just say something. It's very short. You know, I often tell people that any scene in a movie, like when they're like, oh, you're a mime, and they look at me like, what? And they think I'm a clown. And I say, basically, any moment or several moments in a movie without any words is technically a pantomime. If those actors have to stop and then do that section again, they are basically pantomime acting, you know, where they don't have any words. And I like to tell people that, you know, there's also other cultures. And recently I discovered that in other cultures, they call it a mimer, not just mime. And I think that's interesting to think of, is like a mimer right away is a little more clear than when you say, I'm a mime. I don't know what it is that, you know, resonates with that, but it sounds a little incorrect at first to someone with a Western education. But I think that mime is so broad. You know, it's in hip hop dance now. It's in a lot of aspects of theater, and it's not a whole production's worth necessarily, but it is prevalent and woven in to a lot, especially thanks to Michael Jackson. Okay, that's all I have to say.
I was just going to say that DeCreux often talked about that mime as a distinct art form disappears into, it gets eaten by the general idea of theater, because people who are doing interesting work on stage are doing mime. They are articulate in their movement. They have a basic understanding about how different shapes of the body and rhythms and weight all contribute to a speaking acting part. And that some people, he would say, are like just gifted. They don't have to study anything. But then there's the rest of us, he would say. And in order to have that kind of physical presence, we need to go back to it's like remedial work. Go back to the beginning. What can move? What are the pieces? What are the directions? What is the weight? What is the effort? All of those things have to be studied separately. And to study them separately, I don't think he ever felt that what he was doing was going to be the end. He was saying to his students, go on, you know, so now take this articulation I've made and this study that I've made and this technique to learn that I've made and go different directions with it. It shouldn't all look the same. So I feel like that I am really amazed that there's been a problem with the word mime for as long as my entire career. I thought just like the pandemic, that it would go away faster than it does, and that we would go back to being able to use Mime in a way that didn't have any kind of negative associations with it. But I think Mime has always existed, always will exist, may or may not be called that, but we all know how absolutely fundamental it is to your presence on stage. It's the meat and the potatoes. It's the skull. It's the heart of the whole thing.
I've always been like very stubborn about using Mime, and also in my work as clown, that to use them and to keep doing it is a way to show people these are the different varieties of mime, the different varieties of clown. This is if you use the term movement theater, it encompasses a lot of different things. If you use mime as specific, they can say, oh my goodness, mime is, as I feel, it's like it's underneath everything. And apropos of what you said, Marguerite, my training at North Carolina School of the Arts, mime was a fundamental part of our training, and I don't see that happening in universities. I was just working with the University of Illinois in Chicago, and that's not a part of their training. And I do think that students are hungry for that, and
they know they don't know.
Pardon?
Students know they don't know. They feel uncomfortable on stage, and as Dick used to say, they don't know what to do with their hands. And then he said, if we could put them in a drawer, but since they're attached to us, we have to learn how to use them, right?
Yeah, I will say that as soon as I started working with mime so readily, and I was in the production of Hamlet as Gertrude it was a wordless production, and after being in several productions of silent acting, I was in that show. And sometimes we would switch back and forth between silent acting scenes and speaking. And I remember feeling like, okay, after this, I'm going to be able to handle just about anything, because there were spans of time I was on stage that had to be alive, full, present, and not do any movement and not do any choreography and be part of the moment and not be upstaging and not, like there was so many extra layers to it. And again, it's interesting, Karen Montanaro, you were talking about ballet. I often think of ballet as like, layers that we don't see. There's this whole grid and tightness, and I think it's fascinating as far as I've lost my thought. Never mind. Keep going.
Karen Montanaro.
Actually, I was going to ask Karen Montanaro to talk a little bit, because I know you're so incredibly passionate about arts and education, and from a very young level of elementary school kids, teaching them mime and movement. You're muted right now, so make sure you unmute.
Yeah, I've found, like a lot of you have, that children really taught me more about mime than, or not to say more, but as much about mime as Tony did, or as my mime teachers, because they really are born mimes. I mean, we're all born mimes. Before we become verbal, we are physically expressive. That's our way, and there's a real urgency to get a point across. And I think that very primitive, primal, deepest craving for connection is where mime starts, and I have, it's tough. I think there is a fascination with technique just because it's so easy to work on, and it's so easy to tell when you're getting better at it. And with mime, that as soon as I started studying with Tony, I started to learn things that I would never learn in a standard educational system. You learn a certain vulnerability, a way of listening to your audience, a way of watching your subject matter, a way of observing that kids instantly respond to. I mean, that was a huge revelation, to do my first mime in front of a bunch of kids in rural Maine who just took to it like ducks to water. And I specifically remember doing a movement story with 3 and 4 year olds. And they were sitting there, and I was talking about a giraffe, and I started to do the movements of a giraffe that we had worked on in Tony's class. You know, what makes a giraffe look like a giraffe? It's not how tall it is, because on stage, you know, tall is just a relative value. You know, you are a standard of yourself if you're the only one on the stage. So we talked about how the giraffe is half its body is neck. So you would pivot at the hip, and that what really makes a giraffe is these beautiful eyes, these eyelashes, the way the giraffe defers to the trees. And I was just talking in front of these 3 and 4 year olds, and I was talking, and then they saw a giraffe. And then I went on with the story, and this 4 year old burst out after I'd gone a little bit deeper into my story, and he said, "That was a very good giraffe." You know, like he was the authority on giraffe. And I think kids have this incredible, the more I share dance and mime with them, the more they are the ultimate miracle and mystery that I hope our educational system will learn how to preserve childhood through mime. How to preserve it as we accumulate more and more experience and control over our bodies.
Yeah. Joan, have you, in your career, played around with the idea of using mime, movement theater, or any labels, or do you resist, or do you succumb?
I started out using mime, and I still use it when I work with children, if I'm doing mime. But there has been a movement towards changing the word because of negative connotations that are associated with the word mime. When you tell a lay person who's not been exposed to all the wide varieties of mime that are available, when you tell them you're a mime, usually they imagine a Marcel Marceau type character in whiteface being annoying on the street and imitating them. And that's where I hate mimes came in, because there were people out there doing it and doing it badly, unlike Robert Shields, who did it well, and Lorraine Yarnell. But even then, some people thought they were annoying because they were copying people and getting in their face. So the street mime, or the Marcel Marceau, they imagine mime as being object illusion. So personally, I prefer I know how to do object illusion, but I prefer to work with actual objects. And I use the mime technique with objects, for example, the fixed point, but with actual objects. And I like to create work using everyday objects in unusual ways. And I think it was DeCreux who said, Marguerite, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we make the mime makes the extraordinary out of the ordinary.
Right.
So it's really like honoring everyday movement and abstracting it, breaking it down, stylizing it, making it more sculptural, making it more abstract, and then putting it back together again.
Articulating it. He was
articulating.
Articulating. And Karen, what you were saying of your background in ballet made you ripe. You had all of the strong plumbing already created, so that when you met Tony and he was then giving you all that inspiration, you had a strong structure.
Exactly.
And you had all of the strength to take that and use it. Right.
I wanted to
just finish what I'm saying about mime. I don't use mime when I describe my shows anymore. I use physical theater, because it's a broader term, and performance art. It's just a more open, broader term, and it doesn't limit the people who hear it. It doesn't limit in their imagination what it could be. It opens their imagination. Oh, what's that? Well, it's an art, but I do believe that a mime is an actor who acts with the whole body in an articulated way. Mm-hmm. As Marguerite said, with using stylized movement, with rhythm, intensity, and form, mm-hmm. and muscular respiration, and weight, and gravity, and all of these things. So this is underneath everything. But I think there's still a problem with educating the public about what mime is. And there are so many different types of mime and so many different types of people expressing themselves through mime. How do you even do that?
Yeah.
I wanted to say something quickly about our subject of transferring to puppetry so easily and, saying that they are mimes. I feel like it's very much, and we talk about children, and I feel like children and this go together. This definition is that we like to personify. I think one of the best things and hilarious things is like when you personify something on stage that you are not, like a tree, or a piece of trash blowing in the wind. There's all sorts of things that you can personify for the audience, and the mime artist is the one that is demanded to act and move at the same time. A dancer is not necessarily required to also act on their face and on their interior. And I like to explain to people when we're talking about mime and how much more powerful it is when they fill in the blanks of the actions and the objects that are not there. It's a much more resonant production or art form to see for the audience, either in the theater or on the street. And they walk away with their own image of it. And it's something that is akin to like reading a book, and you fill in this mm-hmm. beautiful Victorian landscape that you're reading about, and it's there in your mind. But I think personification was what that we enjoy as humans, to either act out, to draw, or, like with animation, you personify objects to look at our humanity. And that's like right, such a universal thing.
You were also speaking earlier about, being on the stage and not moving. And I think with mime, immobility is just as important as mobility. So it's feeding that moment, even if we're not, and being alive, even though we're not moving, and serving the scene, like as an actor in an ensemble. We're serving, or even as a soloist, you're serving the image that you're trying to create. We are basically, in some ways, putting ourselves aside to personify something else, or to serve a larger image that is bigger than what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Yeah. Karen Montanaro, did you want to say something? You just look like you're like, I want to say something.
Well, I remember watching a few years ago, watching Porgy and Bess on Broadway. And there was a moment where the seedy character, the guy you hate, walked. I mean, he had the whole stage, and the whole, time stopped. He walked on this ramp from downstage to upstage, and he walked like a snake. I mean, his movement just said, I am the seediest, slipperiest, most corrupt person in the world. And the whole audience, by the time he walked off stage, there was a loud eruption of, ugh, it really showed how when you get the movement right, ooh, it's right. It just resonates. You've captured what you wanted to say. It's so good in this age where people are texting and, overly verbal, to get back to the body, get back to how we originally communicated, right to the heart.
I sort of want to switch subjects just slightly, just to talk a little bit about the fact that we are all women performers, and what challenges have you as a female had in your career? I could just sort of start out with my realization, like halfway through running our company, Partners in Mime, which was all women. There was, and we were portraying these characters that were male. I mean, because there was like this sort of male persona of I mean, mime, pantomime especially deals a lot with stereotypes, and the male figure has so much more at that time, seemed to have more possibilities. And I said, why are we wearing these overcoats and these fedoras and being these, you know, we were doing this piece called Partners in Crime, and we were breaking, you know, breaking into a safe, and it was a children's show, but the characters seemed to be very male, and we were like, okay, we're going to work really hard as female performers to make pieces about female characters. But the stereotype of that character was so strong, and I think it's partly because of a lot of it comes from like silent movies, and the male character in the silent movies and silent comedies is so strong and so interesting and fascinating that was like source material for us. Took a positive effort for us to create as women female roles. Anybody else want to talk about their experience?
Well, I found with working with the Securishvilis, they've kind of progressed as far as the traditional role of the woman in an ensemble from, you know, what they had at the Tbilisi school, which was like, there was like usually like 1 or 2 females and then 4 or 5 men, you know, like it was bolstered that way. And they switched roles to tell, you know, to do different productions. And I think a big part of what I love so much about using mime in different object work, like you were saying, Joan, is that there was one point we had a war scene and they had me work with a piece of fabric that was basically like webbed-like, but it was heavy and cotton-like. And so I just threw a fit with it. No one was really directly near me. They were also acting like they were being blown up and stuff. And it was one of the most emotional pieces I did within a production. Like I also had to have my husband die in another scene and react to that. But working with that in such a violent way, and the images I saw later of it and me, you know, because they put me further towards the front so I wouldn't hurt anybody or take their eye out. And I had to be aware of that. And I had to be aware of how to shoot the fabric as high as I could and rip it down and make all these gestures. I was using Michael Chekhov technique. I was using pantomime. I was using all sorts of gritty stuff. And, you know, it's so interesting to pass that on to people when I do teach. It's like, you know, anything, you can imbue a story into anything. It can be your finger, you know, and it's so magical and simple. Yeah.
We started, my organization started with 3, well, actually me doing solo work. Then I trained people, and then we ended up 3 women, myself and 2 other women, for a number of years. And we felt as though we were doing something that went beyond the role of male and female. We were doing a lot of abstract movement at that period of time, and the costuming seemed to us very neutral. But then we added a man, and all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, none of this works on a man's body. These costumes don't work on a man's body. These movements look funny on a man. It was a real shock to me because it didn't seem as though it was in any way made for women or typical of women. We were doing very, you know, explosive sort of movements and things. And over the years, just as we have learned about costuming and had a variety of people come through our company, we have come to appreciate the kind of skill it takes to carry off different kinds of costumes on different kinds of bodies. I wouldn't necessarily say because of entirely male, female, but just different shapes of bodies, different looks of bodies, different kinds of movement of it. Each one has its own distinct quality that needs to be somehow skillfully incorporated into a whole. And now, because it's just myself and a man who are in the company, we often are back and forth. I play men, he plays women, because of the fact that there's only two of us. We have to do that. We use masks. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we use toy theater figures, which is a male figure, and then I'll just stand in that posture and begin acting out the part so that people can follow who we're being, who we're portraying, and then step away from the toy theater figure. But it's been a real learning process over the years for us, of creating kind of techniques that we can feel like we're having an effective message to our audience. It's what we're intending to say.
I can say a few things about it, just from my own personal perspective. I think that being a woman definitely has an influence on, for me, the content of my material. Not all the time, but some of the time. For example, when I was very young and first starting out and first starting to perform, I did a piece about giving birth. I have a piece in my adult show now that is about feminine pre-adolescence coming into adolescence, where I work with a sound montage as well as some objects. And that piece is kind of about the brutality of what women go through in that transition, what girls go through in that transition. And then I also think that, you know, we can be extremely androgynous. The mime is androgynous just by nature. And we can be either gender fluid, as they say now, or neutral. They call it neutral in mime, but it has a certain fluidity there's a piece I do about greed called Money Matters, where I'm transforming between a male and a female just by turning my body in different ways and manipulating the costume. So I think that as a woman, I feel very free to do that. I feel very free to play male figures as well. And I think it has to do with the mime training, obviously, and the mime perspective. In terms of how being a female mime has affected my career, it's really hard to say in terms of the way people respond to me, because I have mostly been involved in work that's been generated through, you know, original work with other people and stuff. But in terms of, you know, I really can't say if it's affected how many bookings I get or things like that. But I know, Catherine, you have some stuff to say about that, right?
Well, yeah, I guess it was generally in our discussion previous to this about seeing castings for mimes in a short film to a feature film. I was background as a mime and a kind of Charlie Chaplin character in background. So I wouldn't say it's across the board, but generally when I do see, you know, a call for a mime, it's more often than not for a male. But I feel like as far as my personal experience, I've been on many gigs as Charlie Chaplin, and I also am not the most slender of mimes, as we were talking about earlier. And I've always been so thankful that it's never come into when I work as a gig artist. And I've worked as a gig artist, I mean, you name the kind of family, I've done it. So, I mean, I like
Can you explain
really,
what that is to
so
the
gig
people?
artists, like I'm a
Yeah.
part of a website and independently as well. But this website, Gig Salad, there's also Gig Masters. You pay to be a part of their website or not. They also have free versions. You have your pictures, your quote of how much you charge an hour, costumes, videos of yourself, and you can get booked that way. And you give up a little bit of your fee, you know, to the website itself. And so I've had people, so it's a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvahs, weddings. I mean, one of the first gigs that I did here in New York City area was for a wedding reception. And we're talking this whole discussion of mime and how that drives people crazy. I could not get my mind around it. How am I going to do mime at a wedding reception and not get killed, right? I don't know what's going to happen. I didn't have a lot of experience with gigs. And so the bride was like over the moon with mimes. She loved mimes ever since she was a kid, and she was younger than me. So that says something about the love of mime is not completely disappearing. There are still young people that like just go goo goo gaga over mimes. I can tell you because I've been hired by them. And so it was just lovely. I mean, I adapted to what that, the family, I could tell who didn't want to have anything to do with me. And I did dabble in some making fun of things, but didn't harbor. I would say the last 45 minutes was just me simply being chased by the children at the event, which is just as beautiful for the adults to watch as a mime, actual mime routine. So
could I ask you a question about what you
Yes.
said before? You said that in some of the gigs where they're asking for a male, they're asking for a mime.
Yes.
You would audition or you would send in your stuff.
I would say male or female. Yes.
And they would predominantly choose males, you were saying, right? Casting.
Casting wise, I don't know for sure. I would never, I wouldn't always see who they did cast. So I cannot say.
I'm just wondering why you think that is. I'm just curious.
Well,
does anybody have any idea about that?
I would say that, what we were talking about earlier is like, it's a niche art. There's not a lot of thorough mime programs in schools across America. There are certainly private, places that have a mime curriculum. Absolutely. But unless you are privileged, we're going to bring that up, and have the capacity to delve into, so now it's much more expensive to study and go somewhere and study and go somewhere. So I found myself very thankful that I learned from people from the Republic of Georgia within the United States. Like, how do you connect with people like that? So that's something that's like, for me, it's like, extra special, but I feel like people, the programs are not there. So people have certain opinions. And one of my beginning philosophies and goals when I came to New York was to change people's minds about what mime was, and show them it could be really cool. And like, whoa, like, when you see hip hop dancers. Yes.
Right.
And
like
so,
the more you do it, the more people will realize that this is a possibility.
Yeah.
Joan, one of the things I'm sorry, Catherine, Joan said something about the gender fluidity and playing neutral and playing roles. And I mentioned this to you guys before, but that was one of the things that always sort of my awareness that women, we as women were performing as men and accepted as these roles because we could take on that role of a male stereotype. But that always it seemed that when men would play women, it was for comic effect. It was women, and particularly in the circus, it's always a guaranteed laugh if a man is dressed up as a woman, and wears stockings with little bits of hair on them and puts the
giant balloons
balloons under. And I was like, how come there's no guaranteed laugh for the women? It doesn't work that way. But I also did appreciate the fact, like you, Catherine, that you can play Charlie Chaplin, and that's a stereotype of a male figure. but you are, I think women can do that, which is wonderful. But pertaining to your discussion about casting, I remember when I was just beginning in Chicago that almost always they would hire a guy. Just
Yes. Yes,
well,
I
well,
feel
Marceau was a guy, right?
You're muted,
Marceau was
Joan.
a guy. So that was the prevalent image people were used to thinking of.
Exactly.
And a lot of men and other mime performers of that time did the same outfit, the striped shirt. I mean, actually, Marcel didn't have much of a striped shirt, right?
The bib.
No,
Karen. Oh
a
yeah,
little vest.
Karen.
I think, though, as far as dealing with a male, female, it definitely with this, the millennial population, that's dissipating quite a bit because the how you call yourself, she, her, what is your pronoun, is so prevalent. I mean, that wasn't going on in my childhood, and so I feel like there's a lot of leeway now for. Especially incidentally, what I see on TikTok, I see a lot of young women personifying males and being heavily liked for it and heavily followed for it. So I think some of the tradition comes from the philosophy of any male director saying, we cannot laugh at the original mother. We cannot laugh at a female figure. It is disrespectful. And I feel like that was definitely a philosophy at some point, and just kind of like, you need to fight your way through in the comedy world, to get there. And so we have, yet to really fill the comedy world with as many women as we have men. And, but I think with mime, there is this, really open field. I will agree with that as far as playing the different sexes. Yeah.
My question has to do with who's doing the hiring. It usually is, if it's, if that has some influence on it, if it's more males doing the producing or the hiring, the booking. But there are plenty of women out there doing
it. The scene they're looking to, sorry to cut you off.
That's okay.
The scene.
Go ahead.
So the scene is often in the castings a quintessential New York street scene. So if you had females that felt safe enough to do street performing more than just a Disney puff character, which even they have to travel in pairs for safety in Times Square. Yes. So I think that's another part of the unspoken history of street performance, is that a solo female, is dealing with a lot of other things. And I don't mean to say that a male performer does not. I was standing watching in Astor Place, which is near New York University, Cooper Union, and there's the Starbucks, and there's this wonderful guy, clearly knowledgeable in a lot of dance and some mime, spray paint, living statue, metallic looking, orange, and some young guy comes running up to him and just and like puts his fist within an inch of this man's face as a joke. And this man clearly had dealt with that before because he didn't flinch. So yes, it's sad that, we have programmed our culture to go to a movie and go inside to see entertainment. So that's another thing that I'm so happy when I see street performers, just musicians in New York City still performing. Go ahead.
I'm just reminded of a really wonderful story that Julie Goel tells in her book about being in Italy, and I think she climbed up on some sort of a column or a plinth and stood there and posed for these long periods of times, and the crowds would just come to watch this woman who was a living statue. And how much what a wonderful experience it was for her, but also that these crowds would gather.
Yeah, there's a new one in New York City, somewhat new. I would say it's been about, I saw him a couple of years ago, at least 4 years ago. So I think he was a student here. He's very petite and very small young man. And he perches within fountains in Washington Square Park or within, stuff. And he's, painted very simply, living statue, very simple garment, but like people just are like, they love it. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah, Marguerite.
Yes, I was reading through the chats here, and I see that we have a message from Jean Barber, who runs American Mime Theater now. And I just wanted to do a shout out to American Mime Theater, that is the oldest operating mime theater in America. And the great contribution that they are the ones, Paul Curtis there is the one who started International Mimes and Pantomimists. She's pointing out that they did the first international directory of mimes in 1974. I did the second edition by myself on a typewriter in Wisconsin. So after it had been turned over to Reed Gilbert at Valley Studio. So I just wanted to make sure we gave a shout out to that organization and to Jean, who's a very important part of the women in mime.
Yes, she is.
Yeah, and it's a good moment for us to say tune in next Saturday, because Jean will be one of the guests in that mime forum, and that's going to be a great, wonderful history. Also on that chat will be Sharon Diskin of Chameleon Mime is going to be the MC. We're also going to have Joan Shirley, who was supposed to be on this one, but she's traveling in Mexico. But
Joan Shirley, yeah.
She's the co-founding artistic director, founding artistic director of Del Arte School. So this is going to be incredibly interesting to hear her. And also Sarah June, who is a Butoh artist. So I think did I name everyone that's going to be there? Jean, Sharon. We were hoping that Carrie Margulies was also going to be, but she's not available. So we're collecting more women, and would love to hear nominations for people that should be a part of these women discussion, Women in Mime, USA Women in Mime chat forums, whatever we're going to call them, because we couldn't put everybody in these two.
We're looking for women of color. We're looking for women of different backgrounds, which we have been looking. We wanted more representation, multicultural representation on the panels. And we did reach out to a few people who did not get back to us. We didn't have all their contact information, so I think that may be why. So we're hoping that down the line we can do more of a panel. And I actually think it would be a great subject matter to have a women and mime multicultural as the subject matter.
Yes, and I think as far as the chat goes, there was also a question here about music. And music is very important in mime, I think. And the specific question was about copyright issues, like particularly since a lot of what we're doing now is we're posting stuff online to share with people. And we need to support the musicians, of course. Talk to us a little bit about music. Karen, we haven't heard from you for a while. Do you have stuff you want to say about using music in mime?
I really don't. No? Anybody else?
Marguerite, Catherine, sorry, I didn't see you.
I just want to say that what DeCrue used to always say about using music is don't fool yourself. Turn the music off and see how it looks without the music, because a lot of people think they're doing something when they're not.
Music can be very, very powerful. Like you can get if there's a beautiful piece of music, you can get away with a lot. That's really good advice, Marguerite.
Yes, I've had auditions. Richmond Shepard was like, no, you can't audition with your music. Turn that off. Do the same thing you were going to do without it. And I was like, okay, because I know my music. But I must say real quickly to look on certain websites, because now they have a lot of websites where they have small to large composers that put in music loops that sometimes come up as up to 3.5, 4 minutes of music, different tracks. You do have to buy them, but you are buying the rights to the music and to use on multiple platforms. My highest recommendation as far as variety of mood, styles of music is melody loops. I'll type that into the chat as well. But melody loops, you can buy a package of music loops, and you can get circusy, or you can get music that sounds like there was just a war. It's just a great website, and that's what I recommend people do beyond making their own music in GarageBand. Several of my videos, or maybe just one, I did the voice. I improvised in my driveway, and then I improvised on top of it, singing along with no lyrics, and did it split in 2 voices. And it was like a piece, there it was, done. So that way it was easy for me to have ownership of it. But melody loops, I'll put that in right now.
It's also an incredible experience if you ever get a chance to perform with live music.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've worked with live musicians and original music on stage. It's really fun. Like one of the pieces I did, one of the shows I did involved Lewis Watterson, who wrote all the music for the show and played live on stage. He was a funk bass player and a electric guitar player. Yeah. And then after him, we recorded his music, and I worked with a live saxophonist who played along on the stage and interacted with me at times on the stage. Reggie Woods, a live saxophonist on the stage. But I also, when I have done a lot of mixing myself on old style mixing before all this became illegal, and I mix a lot of sound effects with music and with text as kind of a montage that will be in the background that will inform the mime work. And I like to have it juxtaposed to the music. So, you know, to the movement. So the movement is one thing, and the sound collage or montage is another thing. And you put them together, and it creates a third thing. And that's why I called my company Sound Image Theater.
Yeah. You know, we're coming close up to 2 hours, and it's been a very long time. So I thought maybe we would just close out with this one question that we talked about, which was we wanted to pose, which was, what advice would you give to younger performers that are coming up, and maybe in particular younger women performers? So each of you want to sort of make a quick sort of like advice to the youngers? To give it some thought.
I have one really simple. There is no wrong answer in the arts.
Very nice.
My advice would be to find a significant teacher. Find someone who will be your mentor. I could not have done what I have done without the lesson, everything that I've learned from the crew and everything I learned from Tom Lebhart. They gave me all of the skills I needed in order to pursue my life.
I would say, I agree with that. Keep training with whoever you can, whoever inspires you, and find support in other people who are also training or doing similar work. Because for myself, it's been very helpful to bounce off of other people. And I've been very inspired by doing that to continue. It's very hard to do solo work for me. I would find myself a puddle of tears on the floor over and over again. I would set up a video on a tripod, a camera. Now you can just use your phone and tape myself. And all of a sudden I was able to direct myself and choreograph myself. It was so much easier because I could be in it when I was trying things out. I could be really in it without worrying about what it looked like. And then I can look at it later and make decisions. So that was a very helpful tool for me. I would say, don't give up and don't let anybody shame you. Don't let anybody shame your body. This art form can be done with any kind of body type. Think about Pina Bausch. I don't know if you're all familiar with Pina Bausch's company, but she worked with all different, she was a dance company, but she was very inspiring. She worked with all different types of body types. And she really, you know, it's just like we have to get out of, talk about stereotypes. We need to get out of those stereotypes. And don't let anybody tell you that you can't do it or that you're no good. That can happen, especially in the field of theater. Yeah, don't let anybody tell you that you're not worth it or that you're wasting your time or any of that. It's bullshit. You are worth it. It might, you know, I feel like it's taken me a really long time to feel good about what I'm doing, and I still struggle with it, but that's a lot of what it has to do with being a woman in this world that we live in. And it's a constant thing. And you know, if you're starting to feel like overwhelmed, or it's okay to take breaks. It's okay. You don't have to be super productive. Give yourself a break. Take a break. It's okay. And so, you know, for a while there, in New York, I rented a studio once a week just so I could go there and try stuff out. And I was building a show very gradually. But sometimes I didn't get much done. And I gave myself permission to just be in the space and not, I don't have to get something done. I'm just going to give myself space to be in the space and to try out a few things and take breaks when I need them and not feel so bad about myself because I wasn't super productive. That's all stuff that we don't need. Get it out of the way. And call a friend if you're feeling that. Exactly, Karen. Call a friend. You can do it. Be patient and kind. Be patient and kind to yourself.
Ducreux used to say that there are tons of good teachers and hardly any good students. So I think that commitment to learn something, to not expect someone to tell you you are so talented and so wonderful, to let someone actually take you apart and put you back together is a huge, huge thing to submit yourself to, but it makes, I think, a huge difference in your growth as an artist.
For me, I found that working on that it was always a balancing act between perfecting the technique and staying spontaneous and original. And so respecting the tradition of techniques and shows and really beautiful material, to be aware of your history and then always stay in touch with your organic self. Rumi, there are a couple of lines from a Rumi poem. He said, "Beyond wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there." And for me, that really put the technique in proper perspective, that the technique, yes, there is right and wrong. And we have to, I mean, if you're playing a Chopin concerto, you want to hit the right notes, you know, and that's not to say that you have to give up your originality in order to serve a technique. The technique is there to enhance your originality, to really support you in every way. It's not a prison. And if you start feeling imprisoned by it, maybe just go into your room and put on some really, you know, hard metal music and just, you know, dance your energy out, dance your, you know, I think that's probably my best advice to any young person. You are a volcano of energy. You have to find a place where you can just let it out. And most of the time in this culture, if you're using all your energy, you're either getting in trouble, you're in sports, or you're having sex.
Or you're a bitch, or you're a bitch.
Or you're a bitch. Yeah.
Oh, really?
But right. you have to build a strong vessel to contain all of that lava in order to shape that. So it's not just totally shapeless and inarticulate to who you're trying to communicate with.
But sometimes you do need to be inarticulate just to get it out. But
Get it out. Right.
then realize that this energy is such great, rich stuff that you, as you say, you can mold and channel and really use it to express who you are and what the world needs you. The world needs your originality and needs your love and needs your discipline and needs your best. We are really hurting for the best.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you for that wonderful advice. All of it so varied and so wonderful. I think I'm going to take all your advice. I think what I would say to young people is don't ever stop being curious. Be curious about the people that came before you. Be curious about what's going on in the world. Be curious about how you yourself, what you want to say. Don't be passive, be active, and let your curiosity lead you into new and wonderful places.
And be patient.
Yes, that's true
because
too.
It takes a long time to become a mime. It really does.
It is true. Marco, I want you to come back because as we close this out, I really would like you to speak a little bit about your upcoming conference and at the upcoming forums that we're going to have with more USA women in mime.
Right, and I just want to shout out to James Donlin,
Yes.
who had the brains. We're his brainchild to do this. Thank you so much, James, and to Marco and the entire World Mime Organization for hosting this event. We're really grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for being here and for sharing your emotions and your thoughts with us and with everybody who was watching this. And I was sending you messages all along, so we had people from all continents following this chat, and it was really a great chat. And again, thank you very much. We will have for the first time an online World Mime Conference. It will be the third one. It will be in December from 10th to 13th. We should have had already our form online, but it's still not online. It will be in a couple of hours on our website, and we will share it also everywhere on Facebook, Twitter, wherever we can reach people, a form for people to join the conference. It will be free completely for everybody who wants to join it. And we are doing it in partnership with the Shanghai Dramatic Arts Center and the Shanghai International Comedy Festival. So we will have like 4 discussions. We still didn't choose all the topics. We have some 8 or 10 topics, and it's really difficult to choose only 4. But because of all the time differences that we have, we won't be there in person. So we will have people joining us from the west coast of the United States all the way to China. So there's a huge time difference, like almost 24 hours span. So we are trying to fit in something like maybe 3 hours during those 3 days where we can discuss things. And we will have 3 to 4 workshops, mime workshops of 1 hour, and maybe hour and a half, that we will be sharing mostly with students, especially students in China. Mime is not developed in that part of the world, so it is a new nation in the World Mime Organization, and also a huge market that it seems it's hungry for physical theater in general, not only mime. At the same time, there are countries like India, like Bangladesh, where there is a huge explosion of mime. And there are mime groups and mime artists popping up all the time. They are probably learning from YouTube and learning from online videos now. like some of my friends previously, which I met in 1991 in Marcel Marceau's school, that learned from VHS, videotape. I mean, I don't know, the people who are watching us, if they remember VHS videotape, if they know what that is. Yeah. But,
Marco,
yeah.
will the conference be in English?
Yes. The conference is in English. So we are working out now how we will be doing all the translation and how that works with the applications like Zoom and some others. So yes, the conference is in English, and parts of the conference will be broadcasted live, and parts of the conference will be on YouTube later on. So everything will be available, and we will have a small short comic mime video festival that will be available on Chinese, one of the Chinese platforms, and it is a way also to promote mime in China and to educate the audience through internet. And the Shanghai International Comedy Festival agreed to give a first prize to the video, that will win the first prize, so that artist or a small group of artists, up to 3, would come next year to China. Hopefully that will be feasible concerning the pandemic and everything. They will cover all the costs so that they could perform at the next year's Shanghai International Comedy Festival. So that is also, I think, a great way also to promote mime, and in a comic genre. Not necessarily everything is comic, and I know that our audience very often they connect mime with comedy, but that's not true. There are some wonderful shows, dramatic shows, and even tragedy without words. I just would like to comment a little bit on what you said. I think that mime is coming back. Usually through history, mime was more popular if you had a more popular mime artist like Marcel Marceau or Jean-Louis Barrault or somebody else, And when they die or stop doing mime, somehow the interest for mime becomes less. But nowadays, with all the technology, we also, as mime artists and creators of content and internet and all different platforms, are hungry for content. That's what we saw in this pandemic. And mime has no language barrier, so it's perfect for internet, YouTube, for Netflix, and all the others. So it's up to us to provide that content and produce it and enlarge interest in nonverbal expression. Not necessarily mime, but mime also.
And I highly recommend that people join us again next Saturday for the forums, but also to scroll down through the Facebook events on World Mime Organization Facebook page, where Marco has saved all of the previous mime chats. This is number 20, so there's a lot of really interesting content there that talks about the history and what people are doing now, and it's a really wonderful resource.
Yeah, we had also some specialized chats about Marcel Marceau and one about Etienne Decroux. Those were with his last assistants, and very, very good chats. And we learned about their personal life also, not only artistic life, some new things that we didn't know. We had the chat with Jesse Eisenberg and Lauren Eric Sohm, who trained him for the film Resistance. That was like 2-3 weeks ago. So quite a lot of as you said, a good resource, and in different languages. We had chats in Italian, in Spanish, in French. We're preparing some new ones in German and some other languages. So we are really trying to reach the world. And with all the technology, this planet became really small. So why not use it for promoting mime and mime artists?
Well,
Again,
I think
really, thank you very much.
We have to let these ladies go and have their lunch or dinner or whatever it is by now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marco.
Thank you
much.
all. Everybody
Thank
who's
you.
watching. Thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.